Several years ago, right after Christmas, my friends Tim and Susie handed me a copy of a book titled Just Mercy. I imagine a number of you have probably read this book or perhaps seen the movie that was made from it. The author is Bryan Stevenson. As Tim and Susie handed this book to me, a book that they had received as a Christmas gift, they said, "You need to read this book. You need to read this book." So I promptly took the book home and placed it in the stack of the other books I need to read sometime. And to be honest, I sort of forgot about it for a while. Sometime into the new year, I had an opportunity to visit my friend Jimmy, who was a prisoner at Fountain Prison in Atmore for the first time. Now, I had come to know Jimmy long distance. Jimmy was a member of the St. Dismas Episcopal Parish behind the walls. In fact, he had been confirmed there and had been the senior warden of St. Dismas, and he made things in the prison wood shop that were sold at diocesan convention to raise money for things the prisoners needed. I had purchased an Alabama football that he had made to give to a friend. Now, let's not say that I'm an Alabama fan, because after I gave that gift to a friend, Jimmy did make me a Missouri football, and its black and gold beauty sits proudly in my home. Now, this was the first time I'd met him in person, and I won't bore you with the details of my visit. For those of you who want details, just let me know. I'll be happy to tell you some pretty interesting stories. Let's just say that my visit was eye-opening. I learned very quickly that I was not prison savvy. I learned quickly that prison, even if you are only visiting for a few hours, can be a demeaning and dehumanizing experience. I learned quickly that prisoner and visitor have more in common than one might think. When I left Fountain Prison that day, I could not wait to get home fast enough to find that book Tim and Susie had given me. You see, I knew that Bryan Stevenson and the organization he founded, the Equal Justice Initiative, works with the criminal justice system, works with prisoners who have been wrongly accused, works with prisoners who were placed in prison when they were only children. I knew I had to read that book. I guess my dear friends Tim and Susie had been right all along. I will always remember the evening I finished the book. It was during Holy Week, after I got home from our Maundy Thursday service. I will never, ever forget that. In a TED Talk that Bryan Stevenson has given, and in many of his public speeches, he has said that if you want to change the world, there are several things you must do. The first of these is that you have to get proximate to problems. You can't help solve the world's problems at a distance. You have to get up close and personal. You have to give food and drink to hungry and thirsty people. You have to welcome strangers. You have to give clothing to naked people. You have to take care of sick people. You have to visit people who are in prison. He also says that you sometimes have to do uncomfortable things. And we all know that doing the things I just read, the things Jesus mentioned in this parable, can be pretty darned uncomfortable. My visit with Jimmy brought me up close and personal with a world and people that frankly I knew absolutely nothing about. And it was definitely uncomfortable. It caused me to want to read a book that I might never have picked up again, even though dear friends had given it to me. And while I may never change the world, that proximate, uncomfortable experience has taken me down paths I would never have imagined. Now, I definitely want to change the world for people like Jimmy. Brian Stevenson is certainly right about what it takes to change the world, because you have to start somewhere. You have to be willing to get up close and personal with people and situations that might be very unfamiliar, and you have to be willing to do some pretty uncomfortable things. Jesus also knew, I believe, that that's how you change the world. But I think there is something else that Jesus knew. Jesus knew that when we do these things, these unfamiliar and uncomfortable things, we open ourselves up to being changed. We become vulnerable so that we can be transformed. I believe that experiencing up close a person who is hungry or thirsty, naked or a stranger, sick or in prison, as a friend, as someone not unlike ourselves, expands our vision of humanity and expands our vision of God. It expands our vision of who we are as children of God. Showing grace to others changes us. I know that when I have shown grace to another person, no matter how small that act of grace, I have been blessed and I have been changed. These gifts of grace have opened hard, stony places in my own heart that frankly I didn't even know were there. I met my friend Deborah a number of years ago when she attended what we called our When Christmas Feels Blue service about a week before Christmas in the parish where I served before my retirement. She had been invited to come by one of her friends who was a member of the parish. You see, Deborah had not too long before experienced the loss of her father. Her father had been brutally murdered in his home just outside of town. Deborah was grieving and searching and questioning, and with that invitation, Deborah found her way to us. And Deborah never left our parish after that evening. She became a member. She was confirmed. She has served as senior warden. Deborah is a dear, dear friend of mine. However, she will never let me forget that she was the senior warden when I announced my retirement. Deborah is also a dedicated volunteer in the parish's rice and beans ministry, among the many ways she serves there. One Saturday each month, food is distributed to take home and fill empty spots in pantries, and a hot home-cooked breakfast is served to anyone who shows up. At least prior to COVID, it was not unusual for us to serve over 200 plates of breakfast on those mornings. No names were taken, and no paperwork is required. You just have to show up. One Saturday morning, as I walked through the kitchen behind the serving line where she was standing behind a very big pan of scrambled eggs, her usual spot on the serving line, Deborah asked me if I had a minute. I did, and in that minute she told me that she had just served breakfast to the mother of the man who had murdered her father. She had just served breakfast to the mother of the man who had murdered her father. At that moment, Deborah was shocked, confused, and pretty unsure of what was going on. All she knew is that she had looked at that woman and put scrambled eggs on her plate. She now says that as the days and weeks passed, when she was able to process what had happened, she knew that it was a moment of grace, a moment when God began to show her that forgiveness was possible. Up close and personal, yes. Uncomfortable, absolutely. And in that unexpected moment of grace, transformation began for my friend Deborah. I've called her several times over the past few days, first to ask her permission to share this story with you, but also to make sure I did not put words in her mouth. What she told me yesterday is that now when she thinks of that woman whose plate she placed eggs on, that forgiveness has been completed, and all she can feel for that woman and for her son who will never see the outside of the walls of that prison, all she can feel is sadness. Today we celebrate Christ the King Sunday. We celebrate a king who said that his kingdom is not like the kingdoms of this world. A king who doesn't want to preserve the way the world is, but a king who wants to change it so it is more like his kingdom. A kingdom that is full of justice and compassion and grace and love. A king who doesn't want us to stay the way we are, but to change us, to transform us so that we are more like him. People of justice and compassion and grace and love. A king who is more interested in the hungry and the thirsty, the naked and the stranger, the sick and the prisoner, than in the full and the powerful. A king who is more interested in making us vulnerable, insensitive, and open to change than in keeping us the way we are. Today we celebrate a king who spoke with a lonely, sad, thirsty woman, a Samaritan no less, a stranger to him in every way possible, and he offered her living water. Today we celebrate a king who filled a basin with water, tied a towel around his waist, knelt down and washed the feet of his weary friends. My friends, today we celebrate a king whose throne was a cross. Amen.